So this is part 4 of the MIP SP-2 four-wheel drive conversion restoration project. As you can see, I have the front and rear shocks assembled and mounted. The turnbuckles and ball cups are all assembled and mounted. I have the rear transmission brace mounted. So the only thing that's sort of left here is to mount the wheels. I'm waiting on some wheel spacers to come in for the rear, and likewise for the front. I'm still working on getting all the right spacers and everything to make the front assembly work. But I just want to go over a little bit about the shocks. So these are hama Ghuman clear shocks. So back in the 90s, hama Ghuman was one of the first manufacturers to offer CNC machined aluminum aftermarket parts for the RC10 and the Losi XX and a lot of the popular cars of the time. And they also offered these really cool clear shocks. And the idea was that you can actually see when your shock oil was getting dirty. It made it easier to get all the bubbles out of the shocks because you could see exactly where all the bubbles are building up. And it was a really cool idea in principle. But the problem is that these are plastic shock bodies, so they're not very durable. And the tolerances for these shock bodies was also not particularly good. So when I was assembling these shocks, the front shocks went together okay, but the rear shocks were a big pain. And I actually had to shave down the outer perimeter of the pistons just to get them to move smoothly in and out of the shock body. So that was not pleasant. But, you know, they did eventually go together, and they look kind of cool. I mean, you can see I have the purple RPM two-stage shock pistons in there. You can see that moving up and down. For the shock seals, I'm using the Associated X-Ring shock seals with the tinitride unobtainium shock shafts. So I just wanted, to use the best components I could for this, and it does run nice and smoothly now, so that's cool. And this is for the front too. I'm using the same pistons front and rear. I just want something colorful. This is a shelf queen. It's not necessarily tuned to go running on a track. And the oil here is green. This is Losi 25 weight oil. Again, it's just something to add color, just to make it kind of cool. But it actually does go together nicely. I mean, this purple piston for the RPM two-stage piston, it's a little bit heavier in pack than an Associated number 3 piston. And so if you run a lighter oil, like 25 weight oil, it actually goes together okay. It's not too bad for damping. So that's kind of neat. And I'm glad it went together fairly nicely. What's left is, again, for the front here, I have to figure out how to make the front wheel situation work. So basically, when the SP-2 kit was released, this gearbox uses metric components. It uses metric bearings, metric shafts, and the universals that came with the kit had a metric wheel axle, and the steering knuckle had metric bearing housings. It was a red, I think it was a red part. The caster block was black, and the steering block was a red steering block. And the opening for the bearings was a little different. This caster block and this white steering block are from the MIP 410 Legend. I went with the white parts partly because it matches more nicely with the white front arms, but also because they use standard bearings, not metric bearings. And the universals that came with the SP-2 kit, they're not only metric, but they were also designed for the short front arms for the old RC10, the very original one. But if you're going to use what's considered to be the wide front arm kit, which is really just the standard front arms you would have with a team car or a world's car, the dog bone length of those universals is not long enough. So you have to find something else. And they never made a set of universals for the SP-2 for the wide front arms. You could try to use the universals for the 410 Legend because those were meant for the wider front arms. But the problem is the actual width of the front gearbox here from the outside of this diff out drive here to the outside of this diff out drive on the other side, it's actually wider than on the 410 Legend. So what that means is if you had actually used the 410 Legend Dogbone as the suspension compresses, the Dogbone would hit the inside of the out drive before the suspension fully compresses. So the Legend Dogbones are actually too long to use with the SP-2 kit with the wide front arms, and the standard SP-2 universals are too short. So you have to basically come up with your own solution. And what I ended up settling on was the B4 CVDs. And I wanted to use MIP parts because this is an MIP conversion. So I have the MIP aluminum CVDs for the B4. These are 69mm long Dogbones. And I'm also using the B4 wheel axle, which is actually a little bit on the long side. You can see the hole here for the drive pin is a little further out than what it should be. It should be a little closer towards the bearing here. So what I'm probably going to do to make this all work is, you can see over here I just test fitted a wheel hex. I'm going to try to put a B4 blue wheel spacer in there and then add some shims to pick up the slack between the wheel spacer and the bearing and the wheel spacer and the hub. And I have some nice aluminum wheel hubs I'll use for the front here. And just to make sure everything fits nice and solid and there's no play. And I found that Laser ZX5 front wheels would actually be these would be a pretty good fit because they basically have a full offset. So even though this wheel axle and this hex is pushing everything out, the offset of the ZX5 wheel will pull everything back in. So if you combine that with like the re-released World's Car rims, which have a deep offset in the rim, which pushes the wheel out, hopefully the front and rear track widths will be very similar. Hopefully. So we'll see how that goes. But that should be the only thing left to test, is just making sure, you know, the wheel situation is okay up front. And after that, once that's confirmed, I will, you know, mount the electronics, paint the body and wing, etc. This, by the way, here is the rear gearbox brace cut from Revolution Design. They make a whole fiberglass set which includes this brace and a battery brace and a front and rear shock tower. And they don't sell the parts separately, so you have to get the whole kit if you want to use just this brace, which is what I did. I may use their towers and stuff as spare parts for my runners, but I really thought this brace was cool because it's the only fiberglass brace I could find, and I think it goes very nicely with the original fiberglass front and rear shock towers. So, so far so good. This is how it is right now. There is, if I had to complain about a few things, it's pretty tight here up front. The inner camber link ball stud is perilously close to the diff outdrives, and that kind of speaks to how careful you have to be when you drill these two holes here at the bottom of the nose plate. They have to be perfectly measured out. If they're off by just a little bit, it's going to move the gearbox at an angle a little bit, or maybe forward a little bit, or backwards a little bit, and there's so little space to fit this ball stud and the diff out drive and to make it all work. It just barely clears there, so I got kind of lucky, but it is concerning. And the problem I do have, it's kind of a minor problem and I'm not too worried about it. The size of the I guess you can call it cup if you want. For CVDs, the Dogbone has the cup part of the universal joint, and then the wheel axle has the ball part of the universal joint that goes into the cup. The diameter of this cup is a little wide, and it only just barely fits inside this opening here in the steering block. Now, I could try to grind it out a little bit to make a little more clearance, so there's no friction there. Basically, there's a little bit of friction there, but I don't want to do that to these super rare parts, so I'm just going to leave this as is. And again, this is only a shelf queen. I'm not going to run this, so I'm not too concerned about this, but there is a little bit of touching between this dog bone and either the upper part here or the lower part here of the inside of the steering knuckle. So it's not exactly perfect, but it's the best I can find for the time being. And also, the MIP CVD comes with these little collars that you put over this cup, but the collar actually adds a little bit to the outer circumference, and if you put this on, it will not clear. You'll have no clearance between this and the steering knuckle. So I actually had to take this off to make sure this would even fit. Okay, so let's see. I think that pretty much covers the updates for now. Anything else I should mention? You can probably notice I have a lot of blue anodized aluminum bling. The shock bushings are blue aluminum. All of the lock nuts are blue aluminum. The screws are blue aluminum. All of the ball studs are blue aluminum. I think it goes nicely with the white parts. What I would say is that the ball studs in particular, the anodizing, that blue anodizing comes off very easily. So I actually had to buy multiple packets of these ball studs because I would start screwing one in and then, you know, maybe the wrench would slip or something and then I'd end up scratching the ball stud, and I want these to look as, you know, spotless as possible, so I'd have to take that out, put another one in. So let's see if I can find some examples here of beaten up blue aluminum ball studs. I got all these little parts here. So yeah, I guess here's an example, although it's not focusing right. Maybe you see all the gray shiny bits there where the nut wraps around, and that's just from screwing it in and screwing it out. That anodizing comes off very easily, so I try to use the black plastic, associated nut driver wherever I can, so that this has minimal impact to the anodized coating. But sometimes you have to use a steel nut driver, especially in some of these really tight spots, just to get the ball stud in there. Like on this part in particular, I couldn't use any type of nut driver to screw this ball stud in because there's no space on this side of the caster block. So I actually had to screw it in a little bit and then take needle nose pliers and just quarter turn at a time, try to screw it in. But if the pliers slipped, then I would end up scratching the ball stud and have to pull it out, put another one in. So that was particularly difficult for some of the ball stud mounting here. The anodizing does scratch. So yeah, I think that's it. I won't waste your time any further. This is where I am right now, and of course I will make more videos as I make more progress on this. So in the meantime, I hope you like this, and thanks for watching.